Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon in the southern part of the continent. And of course, it's morning in the other parts of the continent, but we are very pleased to be here at this moment. We just hope that when we do screen the full video at the end, that you'll be able to get the audio from the video, because we couldn't get the audio from here. As you all know, we have a rundown of our program, which we have shared, but we have some changes on this program because this morning we learned of the unavailability of Honorable Kembo. So for that reason, we have some changes that we've made on the program, and there's just one which we will move Ms. Teresa to speak a bit later, because she will then take us through this video that we'll see at the end of it. And we encourage you to wait till that time to enjoy this very, very insightful video that we bring to you courtesy of FAWE. But in starting our activities, what we will do is that I will introduce you to the panel just briefly so that you are able to know. We thank goodness that we have Google these days and good internet that we can screen through some of these individuals. For that reason, the introduction at this point will be very, very brief. And but we'll all see these people that we all know. We are very delighted to have Honorable Gavar with us, who is currently a member of the CRC committee, of the Committee on the Welfare of the Child. And Ms. Gavar also seconds as the Special Rapporteur on violence against children, and is currently serving her second term on the committee. We also have Dr. Nkatha Murungi with us, who is Assistant Director of the Center for Human Rights at the Faculty of Law, University of Pretoria. She has a vast experience in advocacy and publishing scientific research relating to children's rights, with specific focus on Africa. In our midst as well, we're also blessed with the presence of Dr. Edward Adai, who is the UNICEF representative of the African Union and the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. He presented his letter of credence in 2018, and since taking office during that year, him and his team have been very, very active in supporting children's rights advocacy and research in the continent. We are very grateful for that, because we've noticed the immense change of direction and contribution of UNICEF during his term of office. We are equally blessed, of course, with the presence of Ms. Teresa Omondi Adetan, who is the Deputy Director and the Head of Programs at the Forum for Women Educationalists, FAWE. She's responsible for overseeing the management of FAWE programs and provides technical leadership in the implementation of FAWE strategy. She also supports the Executive Director, whom she's also representing here, in managing FAWE's operations. Then we also have Dr. Musa. My brother, you permit me to just pronounce the first part of your name. Dr. Musa, who is with us, a long-standing colleague and a supporter of children's rights, both advocacy and scientific research, and is based or currently based at the Secretariat of the Committee on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, now based in Lesotho. We're glad for that. And then we have Ms. Felicitas Mudimedi. Ms. Felicitas is the Regional Coordinator for the Children's Rights or Child's Rights Network for Southern Africa. And she is a prominent promoter of children's rights in the region, and also very active with the CSO FORUM. So that is the rundown of those that we've blessed to have during this important day on the panel. And but just to indicate that we will all have questions at the end of our submissions. The presenters know their timing and what you want to achieve at the end of this important event. Please do send your questions on the chat, and if possible, we could also allow you to ask your questions, but we'll introduce you to the question and answer sessions when we get to that point. That was it for the house rules. I will now pass over to Dr. Nkatha Murungi, who's the Assistant Director of the Center for Human Rights, to give an introductory remark to the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elvis. And thank you, colleagues. Thank you for those of you who are still joining from your respective places. So I would say good morning, good afternoon, maybe good evening to some of you. We are very pleased to have you join us this morning, this afternoon rather. Maybe just before I proceed, I wish to indicate that there is interpretation. And for the sake of those who want to seek interpretation, I should hope that it's possible for you to access French interpretation. It's indeed a pleasure for us as the Center for Human Rights to be able to partner with all the other partners that you have seen on this list. It's quite a long list of presenters that we have on this webinar, which commemorates the Day of the African Child. The Day of the African Child in 2021 is focused on accelerating the implementation of the Agenda 2040 for an Africa Fit for Children. It's a very timely agenda, or it's a very timely theme, considering that it's coming after the conclusion of the first phase of implementation of the agenda. The first 5 years having ended in 2020, and at the start of the next 5 years. So it's a very monumental, it's a very strategic time for us to reflect on what has been achieved, but also to think through what can be done to accelerate its implementation and what that means for children across the African continent. We are pleased that we have a lot of you who are here working with us and being interested in this subject matter. We are hoping that, as you can imagine, it's only a two hours that we have. We had hoped, or we had wished we could have a longer time, but we also understand that with online events, it might be difficult to sustain interest and concentration throughout. The main, as you already know, this is really a commemoration. It's a celebration. It's not an event in which we are able to get into the depths and the details of what the agenda contains or what is going on. But we are hoping that within these 2 hours and the interventions that we get from all our panelists, the distinguished panel that we have, that it will at least trigger interest for you to go back and to look into the agenda and to follow through with some of the other commitments that we have made in relation to the rights of children on the African continent. And we are also hoping that this will not be the last event of this nature, that we will continue to have more events related to the Agenda 2040 and an Africa Fit for Children agenda more generally in the subsequent months, and of course in the lifetime of the Agenda 2040. So please, even if we just glaze through some of the issues, we sincerely hope that you will understand that we have a very short time. The purpose of the Day of the African Child every year is to call attention to pertinent issues affecting children. And we are guided every year by the theme that the Committee on the Rights of a Child provides. And this is the theme that has been provided to us this year, as I said, focusing on the Agenda 2040. And what we are hoping out of today's commemoration is that at least 3 things. That one, we will be able to reflect on the journey so far as the Agenda 2040 is concerned, that we will be able to call attention to some of the key issues in relation to the 10 aspirations of the Agenda 2040. And we are also hoping that this would be an opportunity for us to see what is working and how we can facilitate cross-learning amongst African countries and facilitate transfer of lessons that would be useful in fast-tracking the attainment of the agenda, but also improving the overall lot for children on the African continent. So certainly it's a very wide theme. It's 10 aspirations. We are not going to be able to get into all the 10 aspirations. We are not even going to be able to get into the details of any of the 10, but we can highlight some of the specific issues, which is what we hope to do. From a center point of view, as a Center for Human Rights, we are truly delighted to host this event, and we are really keen to hear what the discussions are going to be and to continue supporting this initiative further into the future. We are also truly grateful for the partners that we are working with, the CSO FORUM, UNICEF, FAWE, And the other screenshot that I may have missed in the list, I'm sorry about that. In Total News, we are sincerely grateful for your partnering with us to host it, and we welcome you from the bottom of our hearts and hope we have a fruitful deliberation. Thank you very much. Elvis?
Thank you so much, Dr. Nkatha, for that, Murungi, for that very brief and succinct introduction. We will now move to Honorable Gavar, who is joining us from Nigeria. To give us an overview of the agenda. It's important to note that she is serving her second term now on the committee, and that she has been involved with the making of this agenda and the adoption process of the agenda. And it's now important that we hear from her if she is able to log on to give her remarks on the overview of the agenda in the context. Thank you.
Honorable Gavar, are you able to join?
Honorable Gavar, can you hear us?
Obviously, it seems that we may need to get in touch with her. Perhaps we may need to move to the next person as we try to establish a connection with her.
Yep, I've sent her a message again, so I think we will proceed, and when she's able to log on, we will be able to take her contribution. And these are just one of the shortcomings of our virtual meetings, and I'm sure all of us over the years and over the year now and a month and the months that I've gone through, that we are able to understand these challenges at this moment. But we will now move to discussing some contextual issues around this agenda, and to also, while we wait for Honorable Gavar to come through and make her remarks, we will move on to Dr. Edward Adai, whom I introduced earlier as the representative and a very strategic partner to children's rights development in the continent and based in Addis. Dr. Adai will be speaking on Aspiration 3 of the agenda, which reflects every child's birth and other virtual or vital statistics that they are registered by 2040. Dr. Adai, can you?
Thank you very much, Elvis, and thank you, Nkatha. It's nice seeing you during this webinar, and thank you all colleagues for joining us, and good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. Let me thank Elvis, and through you and Nkatha, to the Center for Human Rights, Faculty of Law of the University of Pretoria, and the other colleagues for convening us on this important issue on how to accelerate Agenda 2040. There's so much to say about that. So I feel glad to that I've been requested to speak on Aspiration 3 on birth registration in Africa. But I'll comply, and I hope I'll get the chance to say a few words about the other aspirations. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, birth registration and the associated birth certificate is a legal identity. In my view, birth registration and birth certificates complement, but also reinforces our social identity. We are given an identity by our family, but what that is good is you need a birth certificate to complement this. It provides each of us with independent systems for verifying our identity, and thus consolidates the existing social and societal processes of giving names to the child. By the way, according to my Bible, the first act God undertook during creation is naming. And this is what we have been doing ever since, whenever a child is born and there's a new addition to the family. But beyond the traditional naming, it is critical that we get our children registered. This is because your birth registration identifies, among others, who you are, what you are called, how old you are, who your parents are, and through that, by implications, your clan, ancestors, inheritance, etc. Your name gives you your identity throughout your lives and beyond. That's what people call you and you respond to. Just imagine a world without a name, or going around this world without a name. The tragedy on our continent is that close to 50% of our children, that is about 120 million children in Africa today, do not have a legal identity. And worse still, this trend has been going on for the last 10 years. In the last 10 years, it's been the proportion of children with a birth certificate has ranged from 49 to 50. And it's projected that if we continue to do business as usual, will be around 52%. So this is a tragedy. And for some of us, we see the glass half full, but I think the glass is half empty in this particular case. Too many children, 120 million children today don't have a birth certificate. And the pattern is that children from the poor and deprived families, those living in rural areas, as well as refugees and those on the move, are not registered and do not have birth certificates. These children are being left behind and cannot take for granted some of the things most of us consider to be a norm. It's a norm for some of us to register our children. It's very difficult for these children to have their certificates, to have birth certificates. These children are deprived of the fundamental human rights of every child and every person to be recognized both socially and legally. The over 120 million children in Africa without birth certificates have no proof of their identity and are not counted or visible in national programs. Without proof of identity, it's very difficult or impossible for government to protect children from violence, abuse, and exploitation. It is difficult to protect these children, especially the older ones, from child marriage, child labor, and recruitment into armed forces. It is even difficult for these children to access their own inheritance. Birth registration is a fundamental pillar for the life of every person. 3 factors conspire to keep these 120 million children without birth certificates. The first is access to responsive birth registration services. A lot of the current services are archaic. These services have stagnated, and they are serving and continue to serve only 50% of African children, mostly those who live in urban areas and those from relatively rich families. And they have been doing so for the last 10 years. The stagnation at 50% is an indication that business as usual will not change the current pattern or the trend. It means we need to innovate and act to transform birth registration services. We need to act to break the systemic barriers to birth registration, including weak capacities and infrastructures that are not reaching deprived and vulnerable people and communities. The second factor is demand. Currently, the direct and indirect cost of birth registration is too high for poor and marginalized population. Neither are there immediate marginal benefits to these people to propel them to register their children because of sheer lack of services in deprived areas. A recent assessment of birth registration in Africa undertaken by the African Union and UNICEF showed that the cost of birth registration is between $1 to $5 in 17% of AU member states and $1 to $200 for late registration in 35% of countries. Those who bear the brunt of this cost are the poor, deprived, and marginalized families who live in communities with limited access to services. These people have to travel long distances to register their children and sometimes multiple times to collect their certificates, even if they are there. Our role is to make it easy for the poor and deprived families and communities to register their children. The process of birth registration should be an act of service to our people if we believe that birth certificate is a fundamental human right. The third factor is the policy and legislative environment. The continent can celebrate the presence of birth registration in national constitutions and children's charter. But as we all know, policies and legislations alone do not translate into service coverage. What is required is stronger investments, stronger institutions, and greater focus on implementation and accountability. So as we look to the next 20 years with a view to acceleration, I'd like to offer 3 critical and essential actions for transforming birth registration systems in Africa. The first action is to redesign and modernize the birth registration system with a focus on reaching those who we are leaving behind. Without innovating and redesigning the system, it is unlikely that we'll break through the 50% ceiling that we are experiencing on the continent. It's for this reason that UNICEF and the African Union have launched the No Name campaign that defines the game changers to modernize the birth registration system on our continent. It involves 3 elements. The first is interoperability of birth registration services with health, education, and other community-based systems. The second is decentralization of birth registration services to communities closer to where people live. And the third is digitization of birth registration system to circumvent the infrastructural bottlenecks that we are experiencing on the continent. Nigeria has shown that it is possible to transform birth registration system using this IDD framework. I take this opportunity to invite you to join the No Name campaign. The second critical action is to make birth registration free. Birth registration should be treated as a public good and made free, particularly for deprived and marginalized people and communities. While the cost of birth registration is a significant barrier for poor people, the transaction cost of collection is high and the total revenue is insignificant and does not contribute meaningfully to the national economy. It therefore makes economic sense to make birth registration free, in addition to the benefits that we have all spoken about. The third critical action is to create an enabling environment for birth registration in countries. This will require, among others, first, forging new partnerships, particularly partnerships with the telecommunication industry and with organizations and institutions providing community-based services so that we can pursue this IDD framework. Mounting a communication and advocacy campaign to rebrand birth registration as a public good, to mobilize political commitment for universal birth registration, and to increase family and community demand for birth registration of children. And 3, translating political commitment into increased public financing for the service. Let me conclude my remarks with 3 conditions for success. The first is to invest in creating a shared vision of universal birth registration and a sense of purpose to bring this vision into fruition. It requires all of us to reimagine and commit to an Africa in which all children are registered at birth. The second is to create an ecosystem of actors that are working in concert at national, country, regional, and continental levels to make this vision a reality. Actors in this ecosystem must act with urgency and accountability. And the third condition for success is distributed leadership. We need leaders committed to the vision of universal birth registration, leaders that convene and connect stakeholders to this vision, leaders that promote action and mutual accountability, and leaders that sense, nurture, and scale up context-specific innovations on our continents. Ladies and gentlemen, unless we come together around a shared vision of universal birth registration, regretfully, we cannot achieve the speed and scale required to achieve Aspiration 3. I thank you for your attention, and you can count on me and UNICEF in this journey. Thank you very much, and over to you, Elvis.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Adai. I personally remember some of the good work that you've done in UNICEF, and that if not of the pandemic, when we all started a PanRIF initiative in January 2020, we should have continued on the same advocacy strategy in 2020, but for the pandemic that separated us or made us not to continue. From your presentation, you made three good important points that we can take forward. And this brought to mind, for me personally, and based on some of the work that we do, the plight of the Taliban children in Kenya, which is a communication that the committee has decided upon, and Kenya is still having some challenges to register those children to enable them to achieve other rights. The 3 points that you make, the first one is to redesign our birth registration processes. The second one is that we have to decentralize those registration processes. And the third one is that we have to digitalize our birth registration processes. You further call on all of us to join the No Name campaign. And I think I'll add my voice to that as well to say, please, let's join this campaign in order to ensure that our children are registered from birth and that they have an identity going forward. I have just been notified that Honorable Gavar has finally or successfully joined the platform. I don't know if she's ready to make her input now. Honorable Gavar, are you there? Okay, we still have some technical issues from Abuja in Nigeria, where I think she's based, but we will proceed to the next speaker, and that we'll go to a friend and a fellow a member of the Secretariat of the committee, that's Dr. Musa, whom we will invite to make his input on Aspiration 9, and which covers the aspect of every child is free from the impact of armed conflict and other disasters or emergency situation. We remember that Dr. Adai also flagged this as an important component, or that each birth registration could limit this specific aspect. So, Musa, are you on?
Yes, thank you so much, Elvis. Please, could you allow me to share my screen so that I can walk through my presentation I've created? It.
Yes, I would just ask Tirona, could you help us?
Yes, it's on now for you.
All right. Magnificent. All right. Oh. So good afternoon. I hope you can see my screen. Can you confirm?
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I greet you from Maseru, the Mountain Kingdom. I think this is where we manufacture winter and we distribute it throughout the continent, and it's quite cordial. I have 7 minutes to make my reflections. Like Dr. Nkatha said, my presentation is just going to whet your appetite to engage more with the aspects that I'm going to reflect on. So I've made 7 slides of substantive content. Each, I'm hoping that I'll spend a minute. So the structure of my presentation, I'm just going to, I think for those who are familiar with my presentation style, I always start with the vision, then cascade to the content of the matter. I will engage with the vision of Agenda 2040 and then reflect on setting the context of conflict on the continent. Certainly, I will not do justice with 1 minute of that slide. I have identified there are several aspects that one may look at when we're talking about conflict on the continent, but I have specifically identified 2 things that I will speak about in the remainder of the time. One of them is recruitment of children, and I have given examples on ensuring accountability as the second aspect. So I'm going to look at issues around recruitment of children, as well as issues of accountability. Then I've dedicated a slide on addressing issues that are emerging in our experience working on this issue and engaging with state parties and member states alike. There are a lot of issues that we are observing that are emerging, which we are going to address just now. So the vision of Agenda 2040 is fostering an Africa that is fit for children. So certainly we cannot have an Africa that is fit for children when there is conflict. I think you and I agree that conflict does 2 or 3 things. First of all, it disrupts the ecosystem of a society. Secondly, also it has a regressive nature. Any progress that a country or a context or a jurisdiction would have made is usually destroyed, and you have to start again, especially for armed conflict. So in view of that, creating an enabling environment for children to realize their potentialities on the continent is a fundamental aspect which Agenda 2040 aspires to establish. Linked to that is an aspect that I have added myself, some colleagues, where I'm making a proposition that beyond creating an enabling environment, we need to establish a developmental African state which focuses on human capital development, especially of the child, so that this child can be able to contribute to the Agenda 2040 as well as Agenda 2063 as they shall live with it for longer. So we need a developmental state that has created an enabling environment where the children become the major players to seeing the vision that Agenda 2040 as well as Agenda 2063 of the African Union promulgates. Having said that, I want to set the context for Aspiration 9, which I must say its ambition is limited in scope. I think also linked to the African Union Aspiration 6, as well as Aspiration 4 of Agenda 2063, of ensuring that we have a continent that is free from conflict, that is peaceful, as well as a continent whose development is people-driven. So we have Aspiration 9 here, which is looking at children are free from the impact of armed conflict. I'm saying it's limited in ambition because the aspiration still sees conflict in 2040, though it is suggesting that the impact will not be there on children. But nevertheless, it is a realistic projection because what we have seen learning from the Silencing the Guns campaign, it was a 10-year campaign. Hello? I think there's some sound that is interfering from Murungi. Can I proceed?
Yes, please. You may proceed.
Right. So what we have seen with the Silencing the Guns campaign is that indeed the first 10 years when the campaign was launched, where we wanted to silence the guns by 2020, that aspiration was not quite realized. And then the Silencing the Guns campaign has again been given another lease of life for another 10 years. So we'll still have the Silencing the Guns campaign for the next 10 years, according to the Executive Council decision of the African Union 2020. So with that reflection, I'm thinking also with some of the underlying issues that I will talk about on conflicts on the continent, I'm hoping that we would have invested enough to silence the guns as well as stop the wars on children. Before you is a slide where I am sharing, setting the context on some of the child rights violations that are happening on the continent. And I think it's common cause that children in situations of conflict are more likely to be separated from their families, like I indicated, that the ecosystem of the community is destroyed, and they are less likely to be enrolled in school or to have access to basic social services. And resultantly, they will suffer from disease and malnutrition. And there are countries on the continent where the 6 grave violations have been recurrent. And of note is the abduction of children from schools, an occurrence that has been happening a lot in Nigeria. And usually the abduction of children from schools is a precursor of other child rights violations, which I will not have time to venture into, but it's certainly one of the thorny aspects that we're dealing with on the continent, because it becomes an inhibiting factor to accessing education, healthcare services, and ensuring that there is quality services in those areas where there is risk of abduction. And girls, indeed, I think FAWE would agree with me here that girls are at far much greater risk of sexual and other forms of gender-based violence, whilst the boys are at the risk of recruitment, abduction, and killing and maiming, because they will be the ones holding the guns. There are also other impersonal grave violations that happen on the continent, where the attacks on schools, they are very pronounced in West Africa and some of the countries there, and attacks on hospitals by armed groups as well as armed forces. I to underline that, because some of the state parties that we are talking about who are signatories to the charter are found on the wrong side of their obligations, hence my flagging of that particular issue. And also you find that there is a cancer of denial of humanitarian access. And I have experienced this firsthand when we're conducting a fact-finding mission in Sudan recently. And this is problematic because the civilians or the children will not be able to access the services that they need. We also have witnessed on the continent, continue to witness the detention of children, and they are being deprived of their liberty for allegations of association with non-state armed groups. And we had an opportunity of engaging with national human rights institutions from West Africa last week. And one of them was mentioning how sometimes children are detained because they have not yet attained the age of criminal responsibility in that jurisdiction. Therefore, they will be kept there long until they attain it. Then they will be charged for the crimes they would have committed as a child. And the NHRI there was lamenting for lack of justice for children and making sure that alternative justice mechanisms for children are put in place. We also have documented evidence of children being detained by state armies and security forces in countries such as Central African Republic, DRC, Mali, Libya, Nigeria, and so forth, for alleged involvement with terrorist groups like Boko Haram, as well as Al-Shabaab. Now I want to zoom in on one of the aspects that I've said I'll focus on, which is the issue of child soldiering. I've put that in context because the African Charter does not provide for there to be a concept of child soldiering, because any army or armed group should not be able to recruit children who are below the age of 18. And at the normative level, we have 7 countries that still make it permissible, even though they are signatories to the Charter, they make it permissible for children who are below the ages of 18 to be enlisted into the armies. And those are the countries that I've put at the bottom of the screen: Algeria, Cape Verde, Cameroon, Guinea-Bissau, Libya, Niger, Sao Tome and Principe. And of concern are the issues that on the slide here, where we are saying some boys and girls, even as young as 6 years old, have been used by state armies and mostly by non-state armed groups, serving as combatants, wearing uniforms, carrying weapons, manning checkpoints, serving in support roles such as being porters, spies, and cooks. And in DRC, now we have a good practice there. I had to flag that it's not all gloom and doom. There are some initiatives that are happening on the continent trying to make sure that some of these violations of children's rights are addressed. So you find that in the DRC, the army now has put a system that screens for its staff to make sure that no children are recruited therein. And some of the things that are working also is the framework that has been established by the UN of the 6 grave violations, where they engage with non-state groups as well as state forces and governments to come up with action plans. I think this is a good practice that we need to flag, even for the African Union to learn from. But of course, despite its limitations, the 6 grave violations indeed becomes an easy to monitor framework for violations. But on the continent, you will find that there are other aspects that are not considered amongst the 6 grave violations, which we think are very key to be monitored as well. Certainly the issue of child marriages is a scourge that is missing on the 6 grave violations, but is happening on the continent as a weapon of war, which we may need to flag when we are developing our own monitoring evaluation framework on the continent like we are doing. There is also unquantifiable violations that are happening and things that we would need to pay attention to, such as the issues of mental health, the psychosocial support that children in situations of conflict do need. I think this is an aspect that is not conspicuous in the discourse, but I'm taking this opportunity to flag that aspect because, of course, it's not quantifiable. It is difficult to articulate except when you bring the children themselves. But certainly that aspect of the impact that the conflicts are having on the cognitive development of the children is something that has to be flagged out. But suffice to note that the 6 grave violations as a monitoring framework is proving to be one instrument that is helping us to make progress. So for example, the government of Sudan signed an action plan and has been able to make sure that it is complying with that action plan, to make sure that they are not listed amongst governments that violate the 6 identified grave violations for children. And Chad also has been on the radar, and there has been full implementation of the action plan to end recruitment and use of children within that context. I am concluding, Elvis. So I'm left with 2 slides, so 2 minutes, if you may indulge me. So the quest to ending impunity indeed is something that we are dealing with on the continent. And if you can see my last bullet there, I've said that this is an epidemic that we have to contend with. Indeed, there are some exemplary good practices that are happening on the continent. I have picked one from the Central African Republic, where Alfred Katom and Patrice Edward, the anti-Balaka leaders, were arrested and were sent to the ICC. It's problematic in itself also, the issue of the ICC on the continent when we're ensuring accountability, because some of the member states on the continent want to retract their signatures. 33 member states are signatories to the Rome Statute, but they want to retract their signatures. I have cancelled there because the definition of the child according to the Rome Statute is about 15 years old, and yet the charter says 18. So already when we were to use the charter as the threshold of protection, more children have been used in armed conflicts. I think the Gambia story about Yaya Jammeh is another classical example where Africa is ensuring that there is accountability for violations that are then against children. I will go to the next slide where we are discussing the emerging trajectories with your indulgence, Elvis. There are 4 points that I'm going to raise. The first one already, Dr. Adai did justice to it. The second aspect is around the role of economic communities in transnational child rights violations. I think this is key, and as Asha mentioned. Also, what we're seeing is the rise of fatal, I have flagged the word fertile there because initially some of these conflicts used to exist previously, but they have now become even more fertile because of accessibility to weaponry. And also the last aspect is around us, we need to conceptualize conflicts as business because there are companies indeed that are producing weaponry and they want that weapons, they want those weapons to be used somewhere. That's a problem in itself, hence for the need for us to address conflict on the continent involving private companies also who are profiteering from the atrocities that are happening on the continent. And also we need to rethink the obligations of non-state armed groups as they have a role to play in this regard. So my conclusion, as I'm thinking of the way forward, my first submission is that there's no way we can establish durable solutions on the continent for children, for peace without their involvement. Therefore, all durable solutions have to be anchored on children and young people as conduits for peace. And I've also mentioned that we need to address the issue of root causes, which fundamentally is about exclusion in its various layers. And I've also already raised the issue of regional economic communities and their role in ensuring accountability and strengthening of national and continental accountability mechanisms to curb the scourge of impunity. My professor, apologies for overshooting on time.
Like no, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Of course, you've done a lot of work, and probably that's why some of these points are difficult to squeeze together in limited time. I think the last time that we spoke, you were in Mozambique, and after that, you have done a lot of trips around to gather more facts on this issue. I tried my best to get hold of you in many ways, including phone. And I hope that that is fine. I just want to clarify something that I mentioned earlier. It has come to my attention that I probably made a mistake by indicating Taliban children with the birth registration. No, I meant the Nubian children of Kenya with the issue of birth registration, which of course stems out from the Nubian children's case that was decided by the committee some 10 years ago. At this point, we are also notified that Honorable Gavar is back online and is able to join us and make an input. Honorable Gavar, are you on the platform? Okay, it seems like we still have some issues with.
She's in. She just needs to unmute herself.
Okay, thank you. Honorable Gavar, could you unmute yourself?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, good, welcome.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Welcome.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Elvis, can you confirm? Can you raise your hand?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, we can. Oh, okay. I said good afternoon, colleagues.
Yes, we can hear you.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Nigerian time. I want to apologize for coming on so late. I had problems connecting to the network, but I'm basically to talk about some of the workings and the report, the implementation report of the Agenda 2040. You know what it is. Where my colleague Musa has already given a good idea of what the agenda is. I will just briefly say that it's a framework or 25-year plan for long-term strategic action towards the holistic realization of child rights pursuant to the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. The agenda came up, or it is an outcome of conclusions from a high-level conference that held in 2015. as a review period for the agenda. At that time, the agenda was 25 years. And so there was a high-level review meeting to assess the status of implementation of the charter. I'm sorry, the African charter was 25 years, not the agenda. And so the agenda was adopted by the committee in 2016 as a tool to promote more strategic and more result-oriented action towards the implementation of the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. The agenda, as you all know, is made up of 10 aspirations cutting across all critical sectors of child rights. It has a composite implementation plan to measure action and progress every 5 years. If there is a measurement, a goal, aspiration-based level of measurement, and then there is a general measurement, a 5-year measurement on what has been done. 2016 to 2020. And also, that there are the commission, or rather the AU, commissioned a study or a survey, on findings of the implementation process. And this was carried out. Of course, it was met with some challenges. It was discovered that there were issues of reservations by some countries, issues around enforcement, and then the laborious processes of state party reporting, and of course the impact of COVID-19 all around on the rights and welfare of children. And also there were country-based issues, some of the thematic issues, related to specific countries around birth registration, children in armed conflict, harmful traditional practices, and all of that. But basically, after the survey also was done through engagement with state parties, and it also used some of the resources, included desk reviews of what had been done in countries. It also includes self-assessments made by state parties on the progress made in the implementation of the charter, or child rights broadly, that's including domestic legislations around issues of child rights generally. But at the end of the study, there are some findings that came up as cross-cutting and general. And some of them, there were key findings overall after the study, and there were six key findings. The first being that was a general inadequate prioritization of child rights implementation, and this is evidenced across the continent by insufficient resource allocation in terms of budget, in terms of personnel, and all areas of capacity are mostly inadequate for most countries to be able to effectively implement the charter or any domestic legislation around child rights. This was a cross-cutting issue across all the zones of the continent and in almost every country. It was also discovered that children's right to survival and development, access and lack of access to sufficient nutritious food. This also appears to be interest under the survey. And accordingly, there is a recommendation there for alleviating extreme poverty in order to enhance food security for children. And there's a recommendation that says this must be prioritized by member states in the next implementation phase. In other words, the committee will be on the lookout in the next implementation phase. To say that this has been this recommendation has been implemented, and there is a measurable improvement in the area of finding number 3 was
it seems Honorable Gavar,
thematic areas by the African Union or any of its
Honorable Gavar, can you hear me?
human rights organs has a positive influence on state parties, so that each time the AU focuses on any thematic area, there seems to be action and response towards that. For instance, the AU fight against child marriage, there was a continent-wide response by almost all countries to that. And so that is encouraging. And the campaign
Honorable Gavar, we are experiencing some technical issues. We can't hear you, and it seems like the line is completely broken now. It's frozen. Oh. Okay, we are very sorry for that technical hitch from Abuja. We're listening to Honorable Gavar there presenting the assessment report that the committee has published, or some highlights of the assessment report that the committee has published over the last, for the implementation of the agenda over the last 5 years. But at this point, we will move on to other aspects, because the intention or the aim, as it was highlighted in the start of this webinar, is that we want to see how we can accelerate the implementation of this very important agenda, which highlights 10 key aspirations to promote and to strengthen children's rights in the continent. We are very sorry for the break, but we will now move on to other exciting things. Time-wise, we are not doing bad, but we'll move on to Aspiration 10, which speaks to the views of the child, the respect of the views of the child. And those of us who are in this particular area as well, we are also aware that this could also be looked at from a right perspective, like the child's right to participate. So at this point, we'll take a step now to the CSO Forum, and specifically to Ms. Felicitas, who has done great work in this area and continues to do so, and to make her presentation. Felicitas.
Thank you so much, Elvis. I might be in the sound. Thank you so much, Elvis, and good afternoon to all the panelists and all the participants that are on this meeting. Indeed, it is a great pleasure for the Civil Society Forum to be part of this event, particularly because we find ourselves sharing the stage with people that are seasoned in these issues, but also because we're sharing the stage with members of the committee that really do help us and enforce member states' accountability in relation to ensuring that children's rights are realized in the continent of Africa. We, at the Civil Society Forum, we are going to briefly just speak to Aspiration 10. And as already indicated, Aspiration 10, we know, or all the Agenda 2040, we know that it's coming as a result of the Africa Agenda 2063, and that particularly this agenda is responding to paragraph 53 that is speaking to issues around ensuring that African children are empowered and that they are made to have full realization of their rights through the Charter. And that is why we are speaking about Africa Fit for Children. But we recognize that Africa can't be fit for children in the absence of the children themselves as rights holders, but also as the centerpiece of what we are talking about today. And as we discuss child participation or African children's voices or views being heard, we're also saying that it's important that we take stock and prioritize what the future actions are in relation to ensuring that this continent really does become fit for children. And the Charter does provide that we speak to issues of child participation and particularly showing the importance of children's views in relation to Africa becoming fit for children to fully grow in, fully mature, and fully take the leadership of this continent going forward. But we know, Elvis, that as we do that in the African context, child participation has been a subject matter that is very difficult for many reasons. One of the reasons was the fact that culturally Africans felt that children should be seen and not be heard. And that was embodied in the culture of Africans, where everything is done for children and everything is decided for children, and everything is given to children without necessarily them having to do anything or contribute to anything in relation to that. But we also know, Elvis, that beyond the culture, that there were other Africans, particularly African states, that felt that child participation encouraged children to have a wayward behavior, that it was making children to be rebellious, and that it was making children not to listen to adults. The third aspect around the views of children not being taken seriously was the fact that politically we know that children can't vote. They don't necessarily have the ability of contributing to the political space as is. And because of that, many leaders, particularly political leaders who in many instances in the African context are policy makers, the children's issues were seen as soft issues in relation to how political leaders or legislators ultimately ensure that children's issues are taken seriously. But we are saying that for us to have an Africa that is fit for children, an Africa that listens to their children, we need to adequately have children that are recognized in their diversity, because we know that children are not homogeneous. And because they're not homogeneous, we need to recognize that their contributions, particularly for Aspiration 10, is important, and that we recognize that their importance relies mostly on how we can take their diversity, and therefore their contribution and life experiences are different in relation to their age, but also that their gender is the previous speaker was talking issues, we need to recognize that gender does play a critical role in terms of children's ability to participate and air their views. But there's also an issue around the geographical area where children are dwelling. Is it a rural area or an urban area? Does it have access to amenities or not? That can facilitate for such views to be heard and for such views to be appreciated. But also issues around ability. What sort of approach do we use, and who do we speak to mostly? Is those that are differently abled or not? And then issues around literacy, whether or not we can engage with those that are literate or illiterate, depending on what the issue is. And although Agenda 2040, Elvis, does have indicators, and that goes for Aspiration 10 as well, we find that there are challenges in terms of us having to realize the processes or ensuring that the processes lead us to getting those aspirations fully implemented. And in this instance, when we are talking about African children's views being heard, we are also realizing that this aspiration still has a lot of challenges. And it is on this basis that as the Civil Society Forum, we have taken this Aspiration 10 very, very seriously and have mobilized children. We are engaging with children almost at every event that we have. We have engaged with them on issues of education, issues of health, with focus on COVID-19 and its effects, teenage pregnancy being one of them. We have also seen our engagements on the Charter at 30. We've seen engagements on early childhood development. We've seen the recent engagement with our survey on what they thought around the Agenda 2040 and what perhaps they think should be done in relation to Agenda 2040 if we are to ensure that indeed Africa does become fit for children. And you would be amazed of some of the learnings that we get from these engagements. One of those being that children are knowledgeable. Children are articulate in terms of understanding their rights, in terms of understanding their rights as rights holders and sense of agency, and holding duty bearers accountable. You'll also be amazed at how they are taking this seriously, issues seriously, such that we also understand what their views mean in relation to the interventions that we have. However, we feel as the Civil Society Forum that for us to really fully appreciate and fulfill Aspiration 10, we need to ensure that firstly, that we finalize the child participation guidelines that is currently being led by the committee so that it can standardize what child participation looks like, but also that it standardizes some of the issues that comes with child participation, such issues as consent, issues around chaperoning of children or guardians, such issues as profiling of children on the media, issues in relation to harassment, and issues in relation to cyberbullying. But we also feel that we need to recognize child participation in its diversity, ensure that we are reaching all children, not just those that it's easy to reach, children with disability, children in rural areas, children that are in serious cultural settings, children who can't read or write. And we need to ensure that even as we develop materials, Elvis, that the language is covering all languages, that we have Braille as part of the materials that can aid those that can't see to be able to engage in such conversations. The last one, Elvis, I know my time is running out, is the recognition of of ensuring that we invest in children. And as we invest in children, we need to ensure, Elvis, that at all levels of our communities, that children are engaged. At family level, at community level, at national level, at sub-regional level, and at continental level. Child participation needs to start at home. We need to see professionals who are in this call, ensuring that as they take on new jobs, as they move around, that they engage with children. Lady or mommy who has accepted or is considering accept a job in so and so, is that okay? So that you get to, you know, appreciate what children think about some of these, because it means a lot for them. Losing of friends, losing of the status quo as they would know it, and so on and so forth. Things that can then later on affect them as adults. And we need to move away from tokenism, Elvis. Not have children in our events so that we can be seen to be having children. We need to ensure that we have these children so that we can listen to them as they are speaking to us, such that we can reflect on some of the issues that they're raising, and that we can take some of the recommendations that they're making forward and be seen in our how we improve our interventions, or how we do our next activities, that indeed we have listened and that indeed we are taking their views forward. And as I conclude, thank you so much once again. And I particularly would want to thank the committee that since the CSO Forum started this child participation and listening to children as an initiative, the committee has also embraced us. That these days, as we commemorate the Day of the African Child, and as we go into the committee session, we are always accompanied by a child or children who then speaks to the committee. We can only implore that once we've done that, that the recommendations that are made needs to be followed up. Thank you so much, and thank you for indulging me beyond my allocated 7 minutes.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Felicitas, as always. Thank you for your great contribution. And one of the things that you are calling for is that as a continent, we are able to examine a child's ability, moving a child from presumed incompetence to a level where we accept that children can also make a meaningful contribution to some decision-making processes and matters that concerns them. Thank you. We will now move on to another aspect of our agenda that is very, very important as well. And this will lead us to the documentary that we mentioned from the start. But at this point, we want to call on Ms. Teresa Omondi Adetan, who is the Deputy Executive Director and the Head of Programs of FAWE. Teresa will speak on Aspiration 6 and 7, because these are aspirations that we've been working on. 6 is on every child benefits from fully formed quality education, and 7 is every child is promoted against violence, exploitation, neglect, and abuse. Teresa.
Thank you very much, Elvis, and thank you for this opportunity and also choosing to work with FAWE. Good afternoon and good morning for the different participants in the different regions. I'll quickly go into the presentation because I know we are also running against time. Let me share. Kindly allow me to share my screen.
Yes, Tirona, could you assist?
It's now enabled.
Thank you.
Okay, let me do that now. Yes, thank you. I believe you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Thank you, Elvis. So I know most of you know FAWE and what FAWE does. That's the Forum of African Women Educationalists. And we've been here or existed for the last 29 years. And I'll stick to our mantra where we talk of entry of children into schools, retention of the children in school and transition to higher levels of education. So basically championing for the rights of girls' education in Africa. And we are based, our headquarters is in Nairobi, and we have national chapters in 33 countries of Africa, and with a total of 34 chapters. Just a brief for those who might not know FAWE, but who FAWE is, and we can visit our website for more information. But quickly to our presentation today is that looking at Aspiration 6 quality education, which is basically why FAWE exists. Like I said, to ensure that all children get access into school, that is enter into school, and only not enter into school, but also stay and have quality education that means something to their lives, that responds to the labor market, and also that responds to sustainable development for these children and their future. So we know that we still have challenges on Aspiration 6, in as much as we have progressed by over 80% of children in Africa have enrolled in school, that is at a primary level. The challenge comes in terms of retention. And I think some of our presenters have already talked about it or mentioned a little about the aspect of retention. And we also know that 47% of the 258 million children, school-going children that we have in Africa are out of school. And they're out of school for various reasons, some of it being hidden free education. Recently, I remember I was talking to a colleague at the World Bank, and they were asking about free education in Kenya. Children drop out of school because of not being able to afford. We have harmful practices that some of you have already mentioned. We could talk about female genital mutilation. We could talk about child marriages and making girls drop out of school because mostly they are the ones who get married. And also the whole culture around female genital mutilation. And there are also other harmful practices in Africa. We have breast ironing, we have issues of child witches, being introduced to various issues. So there are various harmful cultural practices that affect children in Africa that we need to get rid of or stop, and that also make children drop out of school. We have teenage pregnancies, which I believe all African countries have suffered the same due to the COVID-19 pandemic, but at the same time, this has also been happening even before. It's just that COVID-19 has escalated the problem. Then in terms of recommendation, I would talk about the Continental Education Strategy for Africa, that is CESA. Just one. Okay, I'm sorry for that. So my quick recommendation would be domestication of CESA, which is the Continental Education for Africa. Then we are talking about adopt technology for teaching methodology in Africa, because that would then help us to respond to instances like what we had with the COVID-19 pandemic. And then we also are talking about the gender responsive pedagogy. This improves the quality of education because ultimately we are able to have education responding to the needs of girls and boys in Africa. And then at the end of one of the other recommendations would be re-entry policies for African states. I know when we talk about re-entry, the first thing that comes to very many people's mind is teenage pregnancies. But in addition to teenage pregnancies, we are also talking about policies that would allow children who dropped out of school, maybe because of poverty, children who dropped out of school, maybe because of conflict or armed conflict in their regions, or even children who dropped out of school because of harmful practices. So basically, we talk about re-entry policies. I know a lot of times everybody's mind just goes only to teenage mothers, but we are also talking about any other reason that could cause a child to drop out from school. And quickly to my next slide. On Aspiration 7, we are talking about ending any exploitation, negligence, or abuse of children. There's been some progress. We have the Salema Initiative, which was adopted in February 2019 in Addis Ababa. Please get time to read about it. I'll discuss a little bit more about it, but with time, let me just mention that there's this great initiative that is going on in Africa. Some African countries have adopted the same, some are still yet to adopt, but the idea is to protect girls from female genital mutilation and to save over 50 million girls. Then we have 19 countries that have launched initiatives to end child marriages around Africa. And it's an interesting initiative because ultimately governments are committing and swearing to protect girls from from child marriages. Then we have also political will by various change is that there's still prevalence of the harmful practices. I won't belabor on the points. And there's also still the need of Africa to unite on who is a child in terms of definition of a child. Some countries still say a child ends at the age of 16. Some countries in Africa have still left it open. But I think the universally agreeable age should be 18, which is what we all would at least potentially admit that at that point, any human being is able at least to start making their own decisions and consenting to various practices. So this is a call that we would make as FAWE to various African states that we need to unite on the definition of a child and the age of when someone stops being a child, sorry. Then there are countries that have very low or no budgetary allocation for initiatives to end violence against children, which still then is a challenge because you cannot only declare that your country or the state is free from this violence if you do not have allocation of resources towards it. And then we are also talking about prevalence of armed conflict, which we have already significantly addressed it with the previous speakers. So what do we recommend as FAWE in the next at least 5 years that is coming, the next 5 years of implementing Agenda 2040? Unity of the age of the child that I've already emphasized on the same. We are looking at domestication of positive policies in Africa. For example, the Salema Initiative, as I've already mentioned. I talked about the Continental Education Strategy for Africa, and FAWE has worked with the African Union to also come up with the gender equality strategy for CESA. So these are some of the documents that we are championing for state parties to adopt because they have various provisions that would help chapters to pick up on issues of quality education and also ending violence against children. A campaign on teenage pregnancy would really be very useful at this particular moment. As I said, teenage pregnancy has been there before, but it has highly been escalated by the COVID-19 pandemic. For example, in Kenya, where we are situated, in just a period of 3 months into the COVID pandemic, we were getting high numbers as high as 4,000 girls in just one particular district or one county. And the numbers have escalated to millions of girls. So you can only imagine if this is compared to the rest of Africa, it is time we really need to address matters of sexual rights, health, education, and also on the issue of teenage pregnancy. So that was just a quick sharing around the two aspirations. But we have produced a video, FAWE, in collaboration with the African Committee of Experts on the Rights of the Children CSOs Forum, a documentary that also summarizes what are these aspects or issues that we are talking about under quality education and also in prevention of violence against children. Children getting pregnant while they are children in itself is an abuse and a neglect practice. Yes, we understand that some of these pregnancies are of, I would say, sexual activities between children or persons of similar age. But at the end of the day, we still acknowledge that if we do not address this situation in our countries, then we still have a greater challenge to work with, and we'll still be denying our children, and especially the girls, to quality education. So I will invite my counterpart to quickly just show a documentary by FAWE, which will also expound on some of the issues that I have raised and the challenges faced by children in Africa.
I dropped out of school because of different challenges, and during that period, I got pregnant at a very young age. Society and friends rejected me.
The broken innocence of a child bearing a child and
Hello, we seem to have a freeze of screen. Jennifer, are you able to project from your end?
Okay, Dennis?
There is also, we have a suggestion in the chat, if we could share the link as well.
Yes, we can. We'll share the link shortly.
I dropped out of school because of different challenges, and during that period, I got pregnant at a very young age. Society and friends rejected me.
the broken innocence of a child bearing a child and walking through the journey of parenting shifts the right of a girl child enjoying their childhood, most especially with the glaring magnitude of the responsibilities. Statistics on teenage pregnancies in Africa are alarming. Sub-Saharan Africa in particular is reported to have the highest number with over 90% of teen pregnancies. An estimated 21 million girls aged 15 to 19 years in developing regions become pregnant, and approximately 12 million of them give birth.
Teenage pregnancy is a challenge that has lived with us for quite some time, but in the recent past, it has been a challenge that is so alarming. Well, to say it's unfortunate, to see what our girls are going through, with a very big number of them forced to drop out of school, but also many of them losing their lives, others getting, so disadvantaged in the community because of the situation.
Well, I entered into a relationship totally disregarding parental advice because I wanted to have access to some basic needs that were lacking in my parents' house. But after falling pregnant, I realized my parents wished me well because the problems just got worse.
La principale cause chez les filles adolescentes, c'est à cause des mauvaises compagnies. Genre, comme je suis comme une autre fille, elle s'habille mal et puis elle gagne l'argent. Toi aussi, tu veux imiter pour faire. Si tu fais et puis tu te protèges pas, genre tu fais des rapports sexuels sans te protéger, tu tombes enceinte et puis ça devient des grossesses indésirées. Si l'homme dit qu'il veut pas, donc à toi le problème maintenant, tu sais pas quoi faire.
The rate at which our girls are becoming mothers is alarming. It is worrying. Many girls have been dropped out of school because of the same problem. The challenge is quite significant. It has been a challenge for a while. Actually, we have grappled with it for a long time.
Many of the girls in Africa come from the rural area. They are from socio-economic low backgrounds. And because of that, many of them are lured into situations that lead to pregnancies. If I can mention the girls that are going to school, they are going to school, they don't have the basic requirements. They are not sure of the next meal after school. And because of that, those that have, and these are mainly men, take advantage of them and they end up into pregnancies in the process. Not that they really want it, but conditions push them into that.
It is sad and heartbreaking that most girls are not in a position to bring sound upbringing to the child. The innocence of these young girls has been violated, swaying up mental health issues. The high rate of adolescent pregnancies is due primarily to the inaccessibility of services such as lack of sexual reproductive health, education among teenagers, lack of safe spaces, poverty, illiteracy, socio-cultural norms, and traditions.
The importance of children learning about sexual and reproductive health is twofold. First, for their own self. For their own self, it enables them understanding how their own body functions. How their own body functions, and also as far as social relations are concerned, on how to relate with a partner. It empowers them in having a knowledge, in having a bargaining power with a future or actual partner.
Here in Sudan, we have some norms of cultural practices. So if someone gets pregnant out of wedlock, then she might encounter some punishment, as it's considered she has gone out of the law or family practices, and she might encounter abort through herself or her mother or father. COVID-19 has somehow worsened the situation, especially with closure of schools and lockdown measures implemented to curb the spread of the virus in the continent. Reports indicate a surge in child marriages, sexual-based violence, teenage pregnancies, and cases related to female genital mutilations. Girls have been affected. Many girls have suffered. After the shutdown and impromptu holidays, most girls fell victim to sexual exploitation and early marriage. I'm a victim because I'm pregnant. Worse is that I have failed in pursuing an education and I'm not even married.
If you look at the COVID situation that we are in right now, the number of teenage pregnancies increased very highly, and that is statistical. Statistics is available in terms of the increase. And of course, analysis of the increase is because it is associated with the closures of schools. And that tells us that girls are more protected when they're in schools. In home, which is supposed to be a safe place, this has proved that the home is also not a safe place because many girls have become pregnant during this period where they are in their homes. And who is responsible? It's those in authority. It's those who are the elders that would be giving them guidance and support. But of course, by saying that, I don't mean that when they're in school, they are safe. They're not 100% safe because even when they're in school, many teachers have made girls pregnant. Many school administrators have made girls pregnant. So it's really about the violence, and which is violence of a gender nature.
We also feel, as civil society organizations, that it's important for children to be involved in ending teenage pregnancy, particularly in relation to how they understand their rights, how they can understand the reporting processes, and also how they understand that they can voice out when they don't want to do something, or if somebody is touching them inappropriately, or if there's something that is happening and making them uncomfortable, that perhaps they can speak to their parents, they can speak to their friends, they can speak to their teachers, the elder who is within their circles, so that such issues can also be dealt with.
Education, تعليم البنت هو اللي بيحميها.
Educating a girl is the most important since it will protect her from getting pregnant outside wedlock. And awareness will help her understand the dangers of getting pregnant while still young or below maturity age, because marriage is based on customs and culture in Sudan. I would like to urge the government to motivate the society and girls not to despair. I want the girl child to be given the first priority. My wish is for the girl child to get education, so as to prevent them from falling into any temptation which can prevent them from having a good future.
Les jeunes filles, mais comme moi, peuvent être protégées. Peut-être qu'on peut subvenir à tous ses besoins, tout ce qu'elle veut, pour qu'elle ne soit pas, elle ne se laisse pas aller, ne se laisse pas emporter par des gens qui ne font rien. Et que
En prenant compte de tout cela, on surveille, elle doit être surveillée. Peut-être par ses professeurs, on ne doit pas la laisser faire du n'importe quoi. Peut-être comme sur mon cas, je me suis posé la question, je me suis dit que peut-être pour moi, maintenant après mon accouchement, je veux toujours repartir à l'école. Mais après mon école, on peut me chercher parce que le travail est difficile. Pour couvrir le travail au Cameroun, il y a trop de conditions. Et on peut trouver des formules pour cela, d'être une formation sans condition.
Once you have made a mistake, girls should not despair. They should always know there is always another chance. And for girls that are positive, you know, there is where you make a mistake and you become so desperate. But there is where you make a mistake and you turn that mistake into a positive. And what I mean by turning it into a positive is looking for opportunities and ways out of the situation that you're in. You know, there are two girls. There's this girl who's pregnant and she says, I'm finished. There is this girl who gets pregnant and she says, yes, that has happened, but life continues. And they explore. That's always the best. Explore any available opportunity that gets you out of that situation. Let the situation not dictate on your life, but you have a role to play in terms of getting out of that situation.
We can only be one if we stand together as a joint force to question the status quo behind teen pregnancies and also acknowledge that this issue is rife and it's becoming a headache in the society. Our girls are being stripped into the unfamiliar grounds of motherhood, and we need to change the course as it remains to be a sensitive subject. We all want an Africa fit for children, as they are the fibers in our communities. They deserve a second chance.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. And thank you for watching with us. And I would just like to call upon all of us to support the initiative and campaign for stopping violence against girls, but most importantly, stopping teenage pregnancies. I've looked at the charts and I can see that most people were commenting on the same about their countries. And Elvis, if you just allow me in 30 seconds, if everybody could just put on their video and we put one hand like this to say stop, we will all stop teenage pregnancies in our country. And I'll just take a quick screenshot and I hand over back to you. Just 30 seconds. So the seconds have started counting now.
On the right, the left hand.
Whichever hand that you find is your power hand. All hands are our hands. Our power hands, we are having Emily taking a screenshot. Some have put on they've raised their hands on the chats. Emily, that's fine. So we are pledging to stop teenage pregnancies in Africa, starting from our countries, of course, to the region. So my seconds go now. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3.
Can't get access to the video. Can't get
2,
access to the video.
1. Thank you. I'm sorry. I hear some people have not had access to the video. In your hands, we'll take the same. And thank you very much for joining us to unveil the video. And over to you, Elvis. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Teresa. I think we will now move on to where we now give you the space to ask questions. And some of these issues around child marriage or teenage pregnancy we can't overemphasize them because they do have a lot of multiple effects. And in some cases, it's a violation itself, and it also has consequential violations on other rights that pertain to children, and specifically the girl child. We will now open up for questions. And also our panelists are still here. I've seen that Dr. Adai has been responding to so many questions on the chat, which is very, very good. But now please indicate if you have a question. And you can speak in French. Vous pouvez poser la question en français ou en anglais, ça va. Nous avons la traduction. Do we have any takers? Okay, maybe I will start, and I will start with Teresa, we just ended now. Is that in your presentation, in your research, what did you find as one of the best practices going forward? Because the recent assessment of the agenda, the last 5 years, has also highlighted the issue of teenage pregnancy, and that especially during last year, when COVID broke in the continent, the number increased. That is what the committee's report actually says. But if you have any pointers to give us on the next steps, that state parties and state representatives who are here on the platform, that they could take back to their government in order to curb the surge of this ill in our society.
Okay, thank you very much, Elvis. Some of it I alluded to in my presentation. The first thing is that we first need to have an re-entry policy, a clear policy on how exactly are we going to identify these girls, how many are they, where are they, and which are their nearest schools where they can rejoin school, which is also convenient for them. Remember, now they're already teenage mothers or child mothers, like we have seen in the documentary. So we need to look at the convenience back to school in terms of access, and not only access in terms of the quality education, but also the geographical access for these children. And that can come out through a clear re-entry policy. Some countries have done this very well. Kenya is one of them. Zambia is another country that also has a good and clear re-entry policy. So if we could adopt such policies, it would be very useful for the state parties. The other thing is that once we allocate some resources, so we don't only talk about entry policies, but we also allocate budgetary provisions for this policy, so that we have seen good practices in some countries. Again, I'll use example of Uganda, also in Kenya, also in Zambia, where then the schools also provide an opportunity for these girls who come back to school to be able to first access the education for themselves. And some even provide a unit where their children be taken care of while these are in school. I know that sounds a bit for most of the African countries, but it is happening in Africa. And it's possible that this can be put in for them to be able to go back to school and also still have caregivers for their children. So those would be my two main proposals. One, have the right policy, and two, provide financial resources towards implementing that policy and ensuring the girls are back to school.
Thank you. Thank you so much. The next question goes to Dr. Dai. And I just saw that he made some very great inputs on the chart, which I would like to invite him to maybe speak us through the percentages that he has flagged on the chart in terms of the issues around childbirth and child registration. Thank you.
Thank you, Elvis. Just to repeat some of my main messages, and that is half of our children for the last 10 years on the continent are not registered. And as we look into the next 30 years, with business as usual, we would only reach 52%. So progress is very slow. And to also acknowledge that in some countries, it's impressive. So for me, it's very clear that we need to transform the system, not for the 50% or so who are registered, but for the 50% who are consistently unregistered. And the three pillars of a successful transformation are what you nicely captured, the IDD framework, which is interoperability in community-based systems, health, education, and other relevant social systems. Decentralization, bringing it very, very close to the people, and digitization so that we dissolve the infrastructural bottlenecks that are required. With digitization, it is possible for somebody to sit in Addis Ababa and register somebody in my village. In other words, we circumvent some of the structural bottlenecks. We need to, these are game changers, but to do that, we'll be only looking at the supply side. We need to also consistently look at the demand side. Cost is a major barrier. Birth registration should be a public good. It doesn't make sense to charge somebody $1 when it costs you sometimes $1 also to issue a receipt. It doesn't make economic sense. It's a social good. It must be pursued as, and we need to come together around that. And lastly, we need political commitment. So those are some of the things that as a continent we need to be focusing on. Unfortunately, we focus on addressing small bottlenecks, but the direction of travel should be systemic change. And for that, we need systemic leaders that can bring about social change. And that's what I mean by distributed leadership. Let me stop here and hope that other people will get excited and join the No Name campaign. Over to you, Elvis.
I think it's an important campaign to join, and that we have to look at means of getting a lot of people on board for the No Name campaign. But I see there's a contribution from a colleague and from Karabo. Karabo, are you available to make this, to actually take us through your input, and especially to maybe to expand on some of the points that you've made now on the chat? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elvis, and everybody on this. Sorry about the background. I was judging a competition yesterday. I forgot to change my background. Great, a 2-hour meeting about because of pregnancies is that we all say there's re-entry policies, but none of those laws and policies in the most of the countries on the continent actually oblige the government to do something about finding those children. It's a very big issue because they all say they've dropped out, but none of the social development or social welfare departments and none of the departments of education actually have campaigns to go out and find those children and at least attempt to facilitate their re-entry into schools. And for me, that is a big gap. It's something that has to be in policies and in laws so that we can ask when they say, well, we have so many girls who have dropped out because of pregnancies, we should be able to ask them, what have you done to find them? And there should be a obligation that goes with that in law or in policy to strengthen that obligation on the states. Thank you, Elvis.
Just to say, Karabo is the director of the Children's Rights unit there at the University of Pretoria. We'll call on Jennifer. Jennifer, you indicated you have a question.
Thank you. Sorry, thank you so much, Elvis, and the panelists for that. So my questions, Dr. Dai, I'm going to put you on the spot because I know you're doing work around this area. So we, as Felicitas mentioned earlier, we are conducting a survey for children. Actually, it's children who are responding to this survey. And one thing that is coming out, children are saying that we should build more children homes, we should take children to institutions as a way of achieving Agenda 2040, especially when you're talking about vulnerable children, like children on the street, children affected by conflict or children affected by disasters. Children are saying, let's build more children's homes. I know you are into
into this movement of children without parental care and the institutionalization, what would you want to say as part of, because I know a lot of Africans and most of us who are watching, they believe institutions and children homes as a way of welfare, child welfare, and dealing with some of these issues of child protection. So what would you tell people who are watching this, and especially our children who maybe be watching this, what should we do in terms of decentralization of children without parental care? Thank you so much.
Dr. Adai?
Thank you very much, Jennifer, for this question. I think the Charter and the CRCs are very clear on the family as the environment in which children should grow. There's an implicit assumption there that the family is safe and secure, and COVID has taught us that that is not essentially always true, because today the African families are under a lot of stress and under a lot of attack, basically because of urbanization, globalization, also because families must work, both parents work to ensure the livelihoods, and also because the traditional structures are changing. At the same time, unfortunately, institutions also have their substantive limitations. Institutions take you away from your social environment. They take you away from parental care, and there's a lot of evidence around that. Institutions try to provide you with basic services, but there's also a lot of evidence around and abuses of institutions. So that is the dilemma that we find ourselves. The message is very, very clear. And that is, we should, as a community, make it easy for families to look after their children. That's what we should do. We should provide child protection and social protection services to families. We should, in all that we do, aim at providing alternative care that is family-based, such as kinship care. In other words, we should have a hierarchy of care that we provide. And as a community, we should be aware of the immediate and long-term impact of institutions on our children. So the real message is very, very simple. And the children also told us that first, institutions should be temporary. There should be havens where we hold them to and help children to be reintegrated into families. And you have to create the conditions. Plugging a child back into a family without creating the conditions would push that child out. So institutions should be temporary spaces. So that's the first message. The second message is that institutions should be spaces where, within the temporary spaces, institutions should be spaces where you hold a child and transition that child into another space. It should be a place where you go and put a child as a last resort. It should not be a place where you leave a child to grow forever. And in all these things, there should be ethical standards, there should be systems of governance, there should be oversight. Because you cannot leave a child in an institution without the necessary arrangements for overseeing the care that that child is receiving. So we've been working as a group, and we are making a submission on the provision of alternative care in Africa to the UNCRC during its next discussions in September. And we are offering some ideas on family system strengthening, and also creating systems that ensure that children in these environments get good services. Because without, a child cannot wait. A child is always growing. We need to provide these children with services wherever they go, in addition to social protection services and other health and education services. Allow me to say one word about education. I think we need a paradigm shift in education in which a school is not a building block. Brick and mortar schools, we've shown in Africa, cannot keep up with population growth. We need hybrid processes for providing children with education. That provides education in schools, but also ensures that children learn online and there are schools in boxes that children can refer to. And the DOTS approach is something that I hope that as a continent would be referring to substantively, is digital connectivity, online learning to complement schools, teachers as facilitators of learning, safety, and skills-focused learning. I think if the two things that will transform Africa are solid family systems and solid education systems, because they deal with the continuum of care and the growth of a child. Let me stop here.
Thank you so much. We are done with time. Time-wise, we should be closing now, but the questions are becoming very interesting. And I'll call on Yajesh. Yajesh, you are in India. Do you have a question to ask?
Sir, hello to everyone. I am Jayesh Rajpuraj from India and human rights activist. Sir, my question is, mostly children sexually harassed from house and nearby. So in this way, we are also working from the sexual harassment is children in home and in relationship is not. Sir, thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your input. I think the point that you made is very important. It's something that happens to all of us across the continent. And I think we have more or less similar practices here and in India as well, where you are based. In the absence of any further question, which I'm checking through my charts now and I can't, I see Dieudonné Atibu has a question has a question. Dieudonné, are you able to ask your question? Okay. We can't hear you, Dieudonné. You are muted. Ça va. Merci.
Okay, I said thank you very much for speaking. So let me the first one to ask the question in French, because I didn't know if also people speak French here. So just to show them that we are together. They are not, they can't seem to be alone. We are together with them. So ma question s'adresse à Madame. Nous avons suivi avec une particulière attention.
Bon, s'il vous plaît, Dieudonné, nous avons eu un petit problème de réseau là, s'il vous plaît. Bon, vous avez dit la question, c'est à Madame.
The question is addressed to Mrs. Teresa.
Ok, Madame Teresa, ouais, continuez, s'il vous plaît.
Ok. Bon, nous avons suivi avec une particulière attention son documentaire aussi. Nous avons suivi différentes réactions des filles qui ont été engrossées surtout pendant cette période de COVID-19. Et la plupart de ces messages a été focalisé sur la façon dont elles n'ont pas été à mesure de se rendre à l'école. Et c'est, d'après ce que moi j'ai entendu, ça a été la cause principale de ces grossesses. Alors, j'aimerais savoir, à part l'école, yes, I'm speaking. Alors, j'aimerais savoir, à part l'école qui encadre effectivement ces enfants, moi, je trouve que le sérieux problème aussi se trouve à la maison. Parce que la plupart d'enfants ne se sont pas rendus à l'école à cause de Covid. Et les grossesses sont provenues de la maison. Ce n'était pas à l'école. Moi, je trouve que sont plus basées sur les écoles, non, les enfants ne partent pas à l'école, la raison pour laquelle ils ont été engrossés. Moi, je trouve maintenant les familles qui, au contraire, éduquer les enfants qui ne se rendaient pas à l'école. Moi, le problème se trouve dans la famille, non pas seulement à l'école, comme...
Bon, merci pour votre intervention. Bon, je pense que votre question est directement dirigée au niveau de là d'où les enfants prennent le grossesse précoce. Bon, je regarde aussi que vous avez souligné qu'au niveau de la famille, c'est là qu'il y a le problème et que ce n'est pas seulement à l'école. Teresa, in your findings, did you get this, that teenage pregnancy increases a lot around the family level or in the family environment and not only in the school environment?
Okay, I'll attempt. I think I had a bit of it. There was a bit of breaking, but I think it's more of even a concern than a question, if I understood that a lot could be thought that girls get pregnant while in school, but they are also getting pregnant while at home. That is very true. And I don't think at any point as FAWE we would want to say that pregnancies are only gotten while in school. But what we are saying is that a lot of these pregnancies are now being reported. And we said during the COVID-19 pandemic period, when most of us had to stay with our children at home, the numbers even escalated. So of course it confirmed that there are also a number of cases that are happening while our children are at home. So our call is that for those children who have found themselves in this unfortunate situation, whether they got pregnant while they're at home or whether they got pregnant while at school or even at the environment of their schools or home, it is time for us to call ourselves to order, if I would say, and see how we can help. And one participant has clearly stated it even in the chat where they say it's time for the governments to have a clear policy to identify where these children are and to put in resources to enable these children to continue with their education, whether they got pregnant at home, at school, or in between home and school. In terms of admitting that the violence can happen at any sector of our environment, as FAWE, and I'm sure most of you in this call would agree that it can take place any different place and time and with different people. I hope I've answered the question.
Thank you so much. We're taking one last question before we wrap up, and I will go to Zimbabwe now, where we have Dr. Tarisai Mutangi.
So, my brother, thank you, Elvis. For the sake of time, I won't put a question now. I'll just make it as a contribution, and I want to speak to the issue of birth registration, which is a problem that I think we have heard from Mr. Adai. It's everywhere across the continent, and I've been wondering as to what sort of commitments states have made, if at all, to ensure that there's improvement in that area. And through research, I realized that states have another platform or some other platforms that could be outside of our discussions here, but quite related. For instance, the UNHCR I Belong campaign, which is ending statelessness, I think by 2024. What I discovered is that they use birth registration as one of the strategies to ensure that they deal with the issue of statelessness early on. And apparently, states that have been targeted through that campaign have actually made commitments, specific commitments to the UNHCR to say by 2024, would have done the following to address the problem of birth registration in their own country. So I thought probably it's another platform where we could even extract some of these commitments and use them for advocacy purposes to target specific states that have committed themselves, even though they did so under a different platform, but I think they can be used even for purposes of ensuring that the problem of birth registration is addressed for the children in Africa under the framework of what we're discussing today. Thank you, Elvis.
Thank you, Tarisai. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to a point where we need to remind ourselves of some of the highlights of this webinar. And that the first one is that birth registration is an issue in the continent. We've been invited to join the No Name campaign. We've been invited to encourage our governments to redesign birth registration processes, to decentralize birth registration processes, and to digitalize birth registration processes going forward. So we're looking forward to such responses as we move on in the next 5 years. We have also been reminded of the fact that we need to speak our governments through initiatives to discourage child violence against children, child exploitation, especially now during online periods where so much can happen without enough supervision. And issues of involving children in armed conflicts, which is rife, as we heard from Musa's intervention in the DRC, in the Central African Republic as well, and that continue to take place. And then we have a very, very important aspect, which I think is something very important for us to take home as well, is the issue of child participation. And that we need to, at some point, understand that children also have an opinion on everything that concerns them, and that they can make a reasonable and meaningful input into finding solutions on some of their plights. At this point, I would like to thank you all for your time. And 2 hours is never enough to discuss Africa's problems. And I think a day as well is never enough. We've been to conferences for days and weeks. And issues around children is something very important that we need to take back home and see how to protect this generation of leaders today and future leaders tomorrow, to protect our children, our nieces, our cousins, and our neighbors. Take care, stay safe, and stay blessed. Bye-bye.